We are the CAT8, also known as the Community Assistance Team 8.
Is a group of Jain individuals and professionals
who are assisting the community at large
during the COVID-19 crisis.
CAT8 began just before the COVID-19 crisis,
when it held a can challenge,
where children created iconic monuments
using cans of food,
raised some 3 tons of canned foods,
enough supply for 4 months,
for the Watford Food Bank,
run by the Furlough Trust.
During the COVID-19 crisis,
CAT8 is helping the elderly, the vulnerable,
those in isolation and key workers.
With meals, essential shopping,
help with medicine collection,
and someone to talk to
whilst coping with isolation.
CAT8 has lined up
a series of webinars.
In addition, we have created a helpline
for individuals and businesses
that need guidance
on the various government schemes.
And the topics of the webinars.
CAT8 is working with
or supporting various organizations,
including Go Dharmic,
Sevate,
Navnath,
SCVP,
One Jain,
the Trussell Trust,
and working with many volunteers.
CAT8 is the newest network fiber,
connecting the community. Our speaker today is Mark Hart. He is a partner at Blick Rothenberg. Mark is a chartered accountant as well as a chartered tax advisor. He specializes in the provision of audit, general accountancy, and tax services for businesses, operating amongst others in the technology, construction, property, education, and the not-for-profit sectors. His clients span a broad spectrum of businesses, from small startups and owner-managed businesses to large international groups. Mark is particularly interested in working with the charity and not-for-profit sectors, and he leads the firm's Blick Rothenberg's provision of audit and business advisory services to these types of clients. He is also a treasurer of a major national charity and a school governor. And he advises his clients on issues such as governance for charity boards and on the general business issues that face the not-for-profit sector. So if I can pass it on, over to you, Mark.
Thank you. Right, let's bear with me while I get the share. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming along to this session, which I hope you'll find of some interest. So, I'm just working about. So there's me, but Ruben has done a very good introduction to me. I'm a partner at Blick Rothenberg. I've been with Blick Rothenberg for 15 years. And we've known Flemings and Hitesh for as a firm for I don't know how many years, but a considerable number. And I've known of Flemings principally because we have a cooperation where we share some staff from time to time from their firm. So as Rumit said, my client base is predominantly commercial, although I do have a large number of not-for-profit clients. I'm particularly interested in this sector, which covers charitable foundations, operational charities, and private and academy schools as well. Just for your information, Blick Rothenberg, if you've not heard of us, we are a firm of, we're a mid-tier firm of chartered accountants based in central London. We have 5 offices now, and we are 65 partners and around 600 staff. Our client base is predominantly focused on inward investment clients and UK owner-managed businesses and their owners. So, just this afternoon, I thought I'd put through an agenda really of what I was going to cover in my talk. Obviously the outbreak of COVID-19 has had a considerable impact on the charitable sector, as it has on all sectors of the economy. So I'm just going to look at the financial impact on charities, an overview of some of the government support mechanisms that are available to charities, some wider support available from other bodies such as charitable foundations, and then some key considerations for charity trustees and charity boards because of the slightly different governance arrangements that charities have to work within. And then just round it off with some thoughts on how the sector can adapt to the changing environment brought about by the pandemic.
Hi, Mark. Can I just ask you to raise the volume a little bit, please?
Okay.
Thank you. Just speak louder, you'll be fine.
Maybe I'll have to shout louder.
Sorry.
That's all right. That's fine. So, when I wrote these slides at the beginning of the week, the latest figures were showing that charities were expected to lose about £4.3 billion in funding in the 12 weeks of the lockdown. Yesterday's Civil Society had an article in which it was estimated that charities would lose 10.1 billion over the next 6 months, which is a significant curtailment of their funding. And 88% said they would have to would see a reduction in their income, and 59% of those charities surveyed said that they would significantly reduce their activity as a result of COVID, and that was higher among small charitable organisations with income less than £500,000, where actually 63% of charities were reporting that they were having a significant reduction in the services they were providing. The impact is obvious, because obviously with social distancing, we are not able to charities are not able to access the usual fundraising methods that they have done in the past. There's obviously a loss of cultural and sporting events and these sort of experience events where people can cycle or climb mountains in a means to raise charity funds for charities. Obviously that is no longer possible. And although there have been a number of online events that have taken place and are taking place, these are not having the reach that the normal activities will have. In addition, there's obviously a focus on health and NHS-based charities, and therefore a significant of other charities working in different fields are being adversely affected, because obviously funding is going towards those charities rather than the existing ones. Again, there's some research undertaken by the Institute of Fundraising, which found that 43% of charities reported an increase in demand, but also a decline in voluntary income as well. Actually, 70% of charities were reporting that they would potentially go bust by the end of the year unless the government introduced some measures to help them. And a number of the umbrella organisations have started some campaigns to try and raise awareness and campaign with government to gain greater funding and greater support for the sector. So there's some charities being run called hashtag Everyday Counts and hashtag Nevermore Needed, which are trying to raise awareness of the effect on the sector. And what was reported in the press yesterday was that a number of people within the sector feel that that they're being overlooked in favour of other sectors of other parts of the economy, and therefore they're trying to put some more pressure on the government. However, where there is some good news, there has been a surge in volunteering. I suppose the outbreak has made people more aware of the fact that there is a community and people are trying to help people within their communities as much as possible. So there has been a reported increase in donations to food banks, for example, and the London Marathon, because that was cancelled, they ran a campaign called the 2.6 appeal, which was pretty much aimed at people trying to do anything with a 2 and a 6 in it, which has obviously helped raise significant amounts of funds. But there's also, there was Tom Moore's fundraising effort for the NHS, which garnered a great deal of press and coverage. However, these aren't having the impact that normal fundraising appeals would normally have. In yesterday's news again, Christian Aid reported that they'd raised £2 million from Christian Aid Week, which was last week, or the week before. Sorry, it was the week before. But where they would normally raise 8 million from such a campaign. So there's obviously a really reduction in income coming into the sector. Coupled with this, there's obviously also a reduction in investment income. So those charities who have an investment portfolio will see a reduction going forward in their investment income, with companies reducing their dividends and in order to keep the cash within their businesses, and also the investment market being much more volatile now. It makes trustees probably less willing to think about realizing cash through making sales and disposals of investments. So and also that has a feed into charitable foundations, who will then not have the funds to be able to donate to other charities. So there's quite a lot of headwind at the moment running into charities, that charities are running into. So there is some support available from the government, which charities can access along with other businesses as well. So the government announced in April that they were pledged to support up to £750 million worth of funding for charitable bodies. But these were primarily focused on NHS charities and charities working in medical fields or working in particular vulnerable groups, such as domestic abuse and those sorts of charities. So of those £360 million from direct funding from direct government departments, of which 60 million of that was going to be cascaded down to the devolved administrations in different parts of the UK. And in addition, £370 million worth of funding was to be made available from the National Lottery Community Fund for small and medium-sized charities, and that is a good source of funding for many small charities in order to be able to access funding. The National Lottery also reported that they were going to make the application process a lot quicker as well. and the reliance upon certain documents, documentation that they would normally need would be relaxed. And in addition, there was a minimum funding of 20 million from the BBC's Big Night In campaign. Finally, in addition, there was some overseas funding available through the Department for International Development, who were going to allocate £200 million for charities working in those vulnerable countries, predominantly in Africa, who might not be able to have, whose governments might not have the same healthcare systems as ours to be able to support charities. As well as this specific body of funding available from the government, there are obviously other schemes which are available to commercial businesses as well as to not-for-profit organisations, and those are obviously the Furlough Scheme, the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme, the Business Interruption Loan Scheme, the Bounceback Loan Scheme. The charities are also able to access, if they have charitable shops, charity shops, business grant and rate relief on those premises. There's a specific relaxation on gift aid on cancelled events, which I'll talk about, as well as obviously access for HMRC time to pay arrangements and deferral of VAT if a charity was making taxable supplies. But I'll pick up all of those in the course of the talk. So the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme is probably the government's most well-known and obvious form of support for charities, especially those employing staff. At the moment, I think it's reported that the salaries of about 9 million UK resident people are being paid for by the government. It's a scheme that's going to run from the 1st of March through to, at the moment, the end of October, with contributions from employers starting from the 1st of August 2020 as the scheme starts to taper off. In order for an organisation to be able to benefit from the scheme, it must run a UK payroll and have a UK bank account. The UK bank account requirement is principally because HMRC can only make payments back to UK bank accounts and not to overseas accounts. The employee who is to be furloughed must have been employed from the 28th of February 2020, and the pay and if somebody was employed from that date, they'd have to be run on the payroll by the 19th of March. Where the scheme is not quite so generous for charities is that work cannot be undertaken by the employee during the period that they are furloughed. So that means that that means that charity employees cannot be furloughed and then volunteer for the charity while they're on furlough. And in order to be able to arrange for this to happen, employees had to consent to being put on furlough, and that consent had to be in writing. While on furlough, employees are still able to get access to statutory sick pay as well, and the minimum furlough period is for 3 weeks. From 1st of July, the scheme is changing so that it's only available to those employers that have previously used the scheme. So, that means effectively employees should have been furloughed from the 10th of July 2020, which is effectively yesterday, for employers to be able to benefit from the furlough scheme. The employer is able to claim up to 80% of the salary costs up to a maximum of £2,500 per month, plus the employer's NIC cost and the minimum auto enrolment contributions for pensions. The changes are, there are changes from the 1st of July. One of the ones which is probably most will be most helpful for charities is that it will allow part-time working. And the employer will then start to pay for the full wage for the hours worked by the employee, and the grant will initially cover 80% of the remaining proportion of the wages. So what that means is if you have a part-time employee who is working for you and they are paid, for example, £2,000 per month, and they work 2 days a week from the 1st of July, the employer will pay 40% of the £2,000 per month, which is £800, and the grant will cover 60% of the remaining amount of money. So 60% of £2,000 times 80%, which is £960, which means the employee will therefore be paid a salary of £1,760 for that period, for that month. And that obviously compares to the fact that prior to the 1st of July, that individual could only earn up to, or rather the individual could only get a furlough grant of up to £1,600. So it's a means of trying to obviously wean businesses off the furlough scheme, but also enables, as a quid pro quo, obviously the employee is better off as a result. What this means also from a practical point of view is that from the 1st of July onwards, the employer needs to understand how they're going to get staffing arrangements right, so that they can individuals can benefit from the furlough, but also still work part-time and still maintain the service levels that that they want to keep. We also mean that trustees and management of charities will need to look at careful planning and detailed cash flow workings to ensure that the business has the funds to be able to move off the furlough scheme and also keep its staff employed. Another form of funding available at the moment is obviously the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme. This is a scheme that is available to all organisations now. When it was first introduced, there was a requirement that at least 50% of an organisation's income had to come from trading activities, which this obviously precluded a large number of charities from being able to access this funding scheme. That was later reviewed, and that requirement to have 50% of income from trading activities was dropped, which means that charities are now able to get a loan from under this scheme. What it means is that this is a scheme that allows up to £5 million of funding to be available from the bank, which is obviously underwritten by the government. Repayment terms of up to 6 years, and there are overdrafts and invoice facilities that are also available for up to 3 years. It's a government-backed scheme with up to 80% against the outstanding facility balance, subject to an overall cap by the lender. There have been instances when this first was introduced of some of the banks being quite difficult about allowing this funding, or still having a large number of hurdles. That's now easing off as they're getting much more used to this scheme. There is obviously an interest payment holiday for 12 months, and there are no lender fees. So it's quite an attractive source of funding for businesses and charities in this period of the pandemic. Obviously, the borrower still remains 100% liable for the debt, but there's no arrangement and no security fees. There will be some form of personal guarantee for some. Sorry, there will not be any personal guarantees for some of the facilities below £250,000, but personal guarantees may be required after that point. So, if in the case of trustees, they may well obviously not want to give a personal guarantee for a significant sum of money, but for a small amount, they might be interested in accessing this scheme. Okay, so and that this slide just covers on about allowing charities to benefit from that. Then also, what also is available is the Bounceback loan scheme, which is a smaller form of funding, which is for sorry, I've just missed my page. Sorry, which charities are able to benefit from. It's obviously a small amount of funding. It's up to £50,000 or 25% of annual income, if lower than £50,000. And it's very straightforward and can be very easily accessed by all organisations. What is very interesting is obviously that there's no personal guarantees of any form required from any of the trustees. So that will make it an exceptionally attractive form of short-term finance for very small charities. Again, there is repayment terms within 6 years and no additional fees for early repayments. And it will be applications up to the 4th of November 2020, but that may well be extended depending upon the circumstances. In both cases, the government has obviously said that they would only lend to businesses and charities which would have been secure if it hadn't been for COVID. So that means obviously they will look at accounts, previous accounts, forecasts and budgets for the years ahead, just as they would do in normal circumstances, to ensure that the organisation was sustainable if it hadn't been for the pandemic. The government also announced a scheme by which it enabled gift aid to be more easily reclaimed on cancelled events. So previously, so what it basically means that because there are a significant number of events that have been cancelled, the organisation is able, and the individual is able to claim gift aid, which obviously allows the individual to claim the donation as a deduction on their income tax returns, because the event has not gone ahead if the individual donates the price of the ticket to the charity. Previously, the charity had to physically refund the cash, and then the individual had to then redonate the money again. But what the government did was allow a relaxation of that part of the transaction, so that actually, if all they needed to know was that the individual had given their consent to waive the repayment of that fee. Obviously, obviously, this is completely welcome for a large number of arts-based charities, which have had to cancel events as a result of the pandemic. There's also support available for VAT registered businesses. So any charity that is VAT registered and is making battable supplies can benefit from this scheme, which has allowed for an automatic deferral of VAT payments from 20th of March until the 30th of June 2020, and that means that they have until 31 March 2021 to pay any liabilities that have accumulated over the deferral period. So it effectively gives everybody a VAT holiday. However, VAT returns must still be continued to be filed on time in order to qualify. Also, where a charity is in a VAT repayment position, it is obviously still able to submit its VAT returns and will be repaid its VAT in the normal course of events. And obviously, if you are in a regular repayment position, it makes sense to switch to monthly VAT returns from quarterly, because that will just aid your cash flow. Obviously, there are still opportunities for charity trustees to arrange time to pay schemes with HMRC in respect of employment taxes or any other taxes that might be due, which predominantly, I should imagine, would be employment taxes. In order to be able to do that, the HMRC will still want to understand how you will make the payments up. So they will want to look at and understand the cash flows that are arising in the charity, and understand how long it will take you to pay, and then they will of course expect you to stick to those payment arrangements, but there is still that flexibility. Also, there is a huge number of organisations out there who are providing emergency funding to charities. The National Emergencies Trust has arranged funding for grants to be given to charities which have been impacted by COVID. And in addition, within London, there's the £2 million London Fund, which is run by City Hall and the City Bridge Trust, which has got £2 million worth of funding available to charities who might need some emergency support, and as well as the National Lottery Community Fund. Also, if you want, there is also a link. There's a link on our website, which if you just put in blittrothenberg.com and go to the coronavirus hub, follow it down, there's a link to a list of a huge amount of funds that have been put together by a man called Ian McClintock, who is a charity trustee. But you can also find it on LinkedIn as well. It's if you look for Ian and McClintock, there's a huge list of about at the time I wrote that was 50. I think it's much higher now. There's about 70 funds out there who are advertising applications from individual charities for more funding. So that's a good link there if you are looking for financing. Charities are obviously different sorts of bodies from normal commercial organisations, and one of the reasons why they're different is often because the charity trustees are not involved in the day-to-day running of them. They tend to be individuals who have other commitments, but who have decided that they want to obviously give some of their time to help charities. So that puts charity trustees in a slightly different position, whereby as a trustee, they have a legal responsibility for the running of the charity, but often don't have day-to-day knowledge of the running. So at this time, I think most charity trustees would actually spend or want to understand much more about what is going on with the charity and what is and probably taking a much more active interest in the way that it's run. Obviously, as in all businesses, cash is king. And so for the first thing for that most charity trustees and the management must do is absolutely be aware of what is coming in and what is going out. So that includes absolute nailing down the cash flows and monitoring cash flows over the period of the next 6 to 12 months, so that you're aware of who is contributing and which suppliers need paying. Obviously, one of the key things you can do is obviously rank your suppliers between sort of like gold, silver, and bronze, where your gold suppliers are your business critical suppliers, and silver and bronze less so, and then to ensure that you keep paying your gold suppliers. If you haven't done so already, I would recommend that you cancel direct debits and standing orders as charity trustees, so that you only pay amounts on invoice, so you're not having cash unexpectedly disappearing out of the bank account. Manage any tax payments that are due, including employers' national insurance and pension contributions, and keep your employees on the payroll if you can. You've probably assembled a team who are pretty much dedicated to the way that the charity is running and what the charity is trying to achieve. You spent a lot of time trying to build that team. You don't want to get rid of it or lose that experience. So any means of trying to keep people on furlough or on part-time payments, or trying to arrange with them different employment terms if you can, so that they work for you part-time, please do so, because you'll need those guys' experience when we get out of this current situation. And what you need to do is obviously keep adjusting the plans and your forecasts frequently as we move through the different stages of the pandemic. We're obviously coming now sort of week 12 of the lockdown, so we're all pretty much used to a certain situation, and having been locked down and unable to do an awful lot right now. But as this eases and there's more economic activity going on, there's going to be more constraints on cash, but your need to manage your cash will still remain. What is also different for charity trustees and charitable bodies from other organisations is this concept of reserves and different classes of reserves. So charities, a reserve is obviously just the buffer, the reserve, the retained earnings, as it were, of the charity, which are to be used in order to manage unforeseen circumstances. There's obviously been a long debate for a number of years about reserves policies and having trustees having to report in their accounts about the reserves policies and taking an active management of reserves, which is effectively their buffer in what would happen in a situation such as now, where there's a curtailment of income. Obviously, that reserves policy is key to understanding and ensuring that you have the reserves available at the moment. Also, reserves are obviously different for charities than they are for other general commercial operations, because there's this whole concept of reserves being either unrestricted, restricted, or designated, and the different reserve types and fund types are obviously key to whether or not trustees can access the funds that are held within them. So obviously unrestricted reserves are those reserves that can be used for general charitable purposes. That means that they are freely available to be used by the trustees in order to further the charity's objects. and so therefore those are the ones that are most easily accessed at this particular time. Designated funds of those are ones where the trustees have set aside a sum of money for a particular purpose or for a particular project. In order for you to be able to, as a charity trustee, to access the funding for those funds now to meet the general day-to-day running of the charity, you can do that quite easily by obviously having a meeting of the trustees, obviously via Skype or Teams or Zoom, and recording that you have decided to redesignate those funds away from a particular purpose for just general charitable purposes in order to meet the requirements of that are arising out of the result of the pandemic. The most difficult reserves in order to be able to unlock are those which are restricted. But that's because the restriction doesn't rest with the trustees, but with the donor. So the donor has usually given a charity a sum of cash that they want to be used for a particular purpose. So that means the trustees are unable to use those funds just to meet the day-to-day running costs of the charity. So in order to be able to access those funds, the trustees need to speak to the donor and to ask that donor whether they have their permission to use those funds to meet the day-to-day running of the charity. So that is where that might be slightly more difficult for charities to access those funds, but it's really important that charity trustees follow, ensure that they talk to that donor. Otherwise, what they are doing is not is effectively void, and the charity will have to repay those funds to the donor because they are actually using them for not for the wishes or the purpose for which they received that money. So I can't emphasize that enough. If you are going to, as a charity trustee, you are going to use some funds which have been given you for a particular purpose, you have to speak to the donor and get their permission in writing to be able to use it for a different purpose. One of the other things that charity trustees need to consider is that often, especially at the moment, a number of small charitable foundations or charitable bodies will want to use the funds that they have available in order to help with the COVID-19 effort. And what they need to do is to look at what the objects of the charity are. As the objects are part of the constitution, and they govern what the charity does, and they also govern how the charity trustees can undertake activities on behalf of the charity. So in order for you to be able to help out, you need to look at your objects and to ensure that they are within what you're planning to do is in the broad spirit of those objects. So the charity objects that really are going to help you are, for example, the relief of poverty, the relief of need, hardship or distress, assistance to the elderly, the advancement of education or advancement of life in young people, or the advancement of health, because those are all very broad terms and very broad categories of need, which can be met, can be impacted on by COVID, and also therefore can be. It means that what you're doing, your activities can then fall within those broad parameters. Also, I should add there, what was probably the easiest one is to have a charity which just has objects of general charitable purposes, because that will enable you to have a much freer reign of what you use your funds for. If your existing objects don't allow you to help, you can amend your objects and in your governing documents but you just need to document that and get everybody's agreement, your charity trustees' agreement to those change in objects. But also you might want to think about, before you rush into doing that, whether or not it is in the right, it is in the spirit of what you want to achieve generally and for the longer term purpose of the charity. And it might be that there are other charities that are in your locality who are better placed to help those individuals, and you can work with that charity to assist it in order to fund its activities, and then together you can collaborate and work to help out within this period of time to help the COVID outbreak. If you don't have permission from within your governing documents to change your objects, then you can contact the Charity Commission and ask them for permission to be able to change your objects. The Charity Commission have said that they will deal with this in a very speedy manner, because they appreciate the time is important. But again, it's still going to be a process that you need to go through in order to be able to do work in order to relieve people during the COVID outbreak. One other thing that charities can do is they might want to try and think about working together with commercial partners. And you can work, and charities can, obviously a large number of commercial partners do want to assist generally within the relief effort against COVID. And they might well want to work with a charity in order to help run a project, or second staff, or volunteer some of their staff to work for your organization, and in some cases run a commercial partnership with you to raise funds to help you in your efforts to help fight the COVID virus. I suppose the thing that trustees need to consider is whether or not that commercial partnership is in the best interests of your charity. You really need to think about the reputational risk to your charity of working with a commercial partner, and whether or not it's the right fit for you. So you really need to sit back and think whether or not there are any risks with working with one of these, with a commercial organization, and document your understanding as a trustee as to why it's in the best interest of the charity to do this. And you need to also think about conflicts of interest as well, especially if there are charity trustees who are also partner owners or directors of some of these commercial organizations, to ensure that there is that individual doesn't contribute to the decision-making process, and that all conflicts of interest are disclosed. So thinking a little bit beyond the current situation, so what do charity trustees need to think about for the future? I mean, COVID is going to have a massive impact on the charity sector, as it will do on all parts of the economy. And it's only really charities and charity boards who are prepared to change that will survive. And that means really taking a fundamental look at the way that the charity runs its operations, and engages with its supporters. I think one of the key things that is going to be that's come out of this is an acceleration of all businesses means of communication and embracement of technology. I think charities, like every other enterprise, need to have a digital strategy. They need to work out how they communicate with their supporters, and having online engagement, so that they can continue to spread the news about what they're doing, and how they are improving people's lives, and using that as a means of fundraising. Charities obviously need to consider their cost base and have a fundamental root and branch look at the way that they run their organizations, and look at each individual project and look at what the cost benefit of running those projects is and what impact that has on society, and then whether or not they should continue to undertake certain activities or whether they should cut them back. And then finally, there's also this idea of collaboration or merger with other charities. So I think, as I said, key to have a communication strategy for all stakeholders, supporters and beneficiaries. Use social media. That does mean that charities need to have a pretty robust list of supporters, their email addresses, their ensure that they, as an individual charity, have a Twitter account, have something on LinkedIn or Facebook, so that they can reach a wide variety of supporters. They also need to think about how to fundraise differently. If your annual fundraiser or your key fundraiser is a dinner or a gala of some sort, obviously that is not going to be able to take place for some significant amount of time. So you have to think about other ways of trying to engage the community through virtual events, be it virtual dinners or virtual campovers. The school that I'm a chair of, we have the PTA has a campover every year, so we all pitch tents in the school field. Obviously that's not going to be able to happen this year, but we're now trying to think whether or not we can do that virtually. Effectively, we're already putting a tent up in their back garden and then contributing something. It's not the same, it's not going to have the same impact, and we're not going to raise the same amount of money as we normally do, but we are going to be able to raise something. And that's how we're going to have to react and work our way through this problem at the moment. And also, if you're a mentoring or an outreach or a counselling charity, then you have to use digital platforms in order to be able to do that, and that might be using text or WhatsApp messages to people so that they can communicate, or you can counsel somebody remotely through that means rather than through face-to-face. As I said earlier, what we really need to do as a charitable board is look at the impact of your services that you provide, and look at what income you either earn from that service or the amount of cost that's involved in running that service, and therefore plot it, each individual activity pretty much on a graph like this. Whereas obviously you're aiming for being able to have projects which have the most impact, but either provide income or don't cost very much within your portfolio. And then you might well still continue to have some projects which might generate some good impact but have less generate more income but have less impact. And then obviously to cull those services which are effectively in the dark grey box, which have neither great social impact or don't raise very much money or cost a lot, because actually those services that you can't provide. You need to be able to move yourself to having being able to get the most bang for your buck, as it were, so that you can provide services in a different way. And again, that's just feeding into that previous slide. You just really need to ask yourselves these questions as a charity board, and then start to communicate that change strategy through to your supporters so that they can come along with you and help support you through this period of change. One of the obviously, I think another impact at the moment there will be a significant number of charitable mergers as we go through the next couple of years. That will be both small local charities might well merge where they have common objects and common beneficiaries, and they feel that this is the best way to pool their resources. And it will also see, I think we'll also see some change within much larger organizations as well. These mergers will only work where both teams believe it's in the best interest of the both organizations, and you can see some significant cost savings and synergies. So I think that's where we might well see ourselves in a few years' time with a few smaller charities, but hopefully a stronger sector. So any questions? I think it must be over to you, Ramit.
Thank you very much, Mark, for a really very interesting and very helpful presentation.